I've primed all the interior parts with Vallejo rattle can primer. It's a color called Bone White. Now, nothing special about the color. I just prefer the interior of armored fighting vehicles to either be a white color, a beige-ish color, or a very light gray color. And just for the reasons, I chose this. Now my plan is, because so little of this will be seen and it's not going to be the focus of the model, I'm going to do a fairly quick job of getting it painted. My goal is, when somebody's popping the top off to convert it from the Rhino to the Razorback, that they go, oh look, it's painted, and they look around it and they go, that's cool, and then they put the top on and then they move on. So this is going to be I'm planning on this to be just a quick paint job. It's not going to be as detailed as previous efforts that I've done with Rhino Interiors. I think I've done it twice here on Patreon. If I remember, I'll put links down in the description. But that's my goal for how I'm going to paint this interior. I'm going to make use of contrast paints for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and give it a little bit of an edge highlight. It's not going to be a lot of contrast, but give it just a little bit of an edge highlight using White Scar from Citadel. It's basically pure white. It'll just help the edges stand out just a little bit. Now if you're thinking, yeah, but I'm not a 40K player, what does it matter about what you're doing there, John? Well, looking back, I could have used this method that I'm going to be doing on a lot of aircraft. This would have been great for cockpit painting. If you've got a cockpit you just want to paint quickly, because quite often I might get a model that didn't have an open canopy option, or I didn't want to put the canopy open, or the cockpit opening was so small you really couldn't see inside of it, so you didn't need to spend a whole lot of time painting it. So the techniques I'm going to apply to this would have worked well for that. This would work well for actual armored fighting vehicles, tanks, APCs, things like that. So as I like to point out, not everything that, just because I'm doing it on Warhammer is just the palette. Warhammer's, or the canvas rather. There's plenty of things, plenty of ways that these techniques can be used aside from Warhammer vehicles. I'm going to be making heavy use of contrast paints from Citadel in this process. And the first one I'm using is Skeleton Horde. And I've thinned it about 2 parts contrast medium and 1 part Skeleton Horde. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint this all over everything. It's going to darken everything down, but that was my intent. So it's just going to start bringing out some of that detail, and it's going to do it in a very, very quick fashion. And if it looks a little patchy and scratchy, I'm okay with that, because that's going to just visually indicate weathering. Very simple weathering, but again, for the purposes, it should be sufficient. I'm just going to grab one of my cheap liner brushes, and I'm going to do a more direct and precise recess shade, still using Skeleton Horde. I just like this color. I could use Agrex Earthshade if I wanted it to be a little darker, but I'm okay with Skeleton Horde. I like it. And more importantly, for my lazy way of doing things, it's on the desk. So I need to reach up onto the shelf. I'll just go and do all of the recesses and angles and things like that around the bolts, just to bring out those details a little more. You can see that the areas that I painted over, they look a little scruffy, but that, again, that's, in my mind, that's going to contribute to the weathering as I get further into it. All right, now that that skeleton horde has dried, I want to add a little more contrast. It's not as contrasty as I wanted it to be. So I'm going to use some wraith bone from Citadel, which is actually very close to the original base color. So it's kind of like going back with the original base color, but I'm just going to hit some of these edges to bring them out a little more. On areas like the top of the seat or something like that, I'll go in and kind of areas like this, I'll just kind of push it around like that, just to help clean up some of the spottiness, but still leave some patchiness so that it looks kind of weathered. Just go around and do this on all the parts. Now, some of these details like that, I'm going to go in with the wraith bone and just touch them like that with a brush, just to increase the contrast. Cover up that dark skeleton horde that I got on there. Also on little details that I'm going to paint another color. I'm just going to kind of reset these back to that lighter color. Like that. And if you didn't think you had enough edge highlighting, say along here, you can just take your brush and just run it along there like that. Just bring it out even more. Now I'm going to paint this control box using Black Templar. And I've thinned it about 1:1 with contrast medium. This will just let me kind of control the intensity of the black. I don't want it to be pure black. I want to be able to put it on and kind of control the shadows and the highlights a little bit. I'm going to try and paint it around these screens so that I don't have to go back and repaint them, but if I get any on there, I'll just go back in and touch it up with some wraith bone. I'm going to do the gun casing also, and this little box towards the back of the interior there. Now, whatever this thing is, I'm going to paint it with another contrast paint called Griff Charger Gray. Sometimes if I want something to look maybe slightly metallic, to suggest it, that kind of steely blue gray, I like using this Griff Charger Gray for that. It works especially nice if you want that bluish look and you put it over an actual metallic, silver or something like that, a metallic coat. Looks really nice. Now I'm going to paint the control screens with Striking Scorpion Green. It's a really bright poppy green. I'm just going to put this on in several coats and see if maybe I can build up the color in one direction or the other just to give it some life. If not, I'm not going to sweat it. Now while that's drying, I'll use another Citadel contrast paint called Ball Red to paint in all the buttons. Okay, the next thing I want to do is add some chipping. Now, when it comes to the chipping, I like adding chipping. So the temptation is, of course, that this just becomes a chip monster. But as I try to think about if somebody pops the lid open so that they can put either the Rhino or the Razorback lid on, they'll look inside. I don't want because it'll be such a narrow space and with such dim light, I don't want everything to be taken over by chipping. So I'm going to use a sponge. Just got this little piece of sponge here, and this is just a piece of packing foam. We actually get it from Harry and David fruit shipments. If you've never tried Harry and David pears or apples, I highly recommend them. Now, one thing I want to point out here, and I see this all the time when creators are using, YouTube creators are using sponge chipping, people that I respect. And I disagree with when I see it done this way. Let me make the point. If I were going to use this liner brush, let me make it a little pointy. There we go. If I were going to use this liner brush to paint something, would I hold it like this? Or would I hold it like this? Or would I hold it like this? Well, obviously, I would not hold it like this. I'd probably hold it like this so that I can get in close. I might hold it like this if I want a random pattern, if I'm doing brush chipping. The point I'm making is, I always cringe when I see someone take a piece of foam and hold it like that. There's just, your fingers are getting in the way. Even if you hold it back like this, it's hard to see what you're doing. I think there's less control. I don't think that's an optimum method. My recommendation would be spend a little bit of money. You can get these clamps cheap off of Amazon at a local hobby store, something like that. Get those, hold it like that, and then you can get back. You can see what you're doing. You can get into places a little better than you normally would be able to. You can take scissors and trim it down so that you can reach into areas that you wouldn't be able to reach otherwise. I used to try and do the foam chipping with my fingers because that's what I saw others doing. I just came to realize I was kind of fighting the sponge, the technique, because my fingers are so big and fat. So just a thought, try one of these clamps. These are great to have anyway. But try one of these clamps with your sponge chipping and you might find it does a lot more for you. Now, speaking of cutting it down, I just quickly off camera cut that down a little bit, so there's just a little bit less surface area up there like that. Now, what I'm going to use is some Rhinox hide from Citadel. It's a dark reddish brown paint. You don't have to use this, of course. Really what you're looking for when it comes to chipping is, if you want it to have a rusty look, you want something reddish brown. There can be, I've used chocolate browns, I've used, things from Vallejo. I've used lots of different colors, but the brand and all of that is not really as significant as the color. So this, because I'm going to want to do a little less chipping, I'm just going to be a little more controlled. I want to suggest chipping, that it's scratched up, but I don't want it to be a complete chip bucket. Now, I'm doing this for speed. If you were wanting tighter chipping, you might decide to just go with brush painted chips, and those would work really well. But while I'm shooting videos in a manner of it's done when it's done, at the same time, while I'm enjoying what I'm doing now, I'm eagerly anticipating the next stage. So there's usually some bit of I don't want to say urgency, but some bit of looking forward to the next stage. So I tend to work through what I'm doing with the anticipation of getting to the next one. Now on the floor, I'm going to do a little bit more because obviously the floor would get chipped up. But I'm going to think about where it would be. It'd be here where they're seated. There's going to be more scuffs. And also where they walk out. So I'm going to put some more here, like that. A few in the middle there. But if you've seen previous things that I've chipped like this, you know that I typically do a lot more. So I'm just keeping it very tight, very confined, not too overwhelming. On this area, this is the ramp that lowers down, that they would exit the vehicle. This is an area that if you were going for heavy chipping, this is an area that you would do very heavy chipping, because not only are they walking in and out here, but quite often in a combat situation, you're running out of this thing. This is an APC brings troops into combat, and when they encounter the enemy, the ramp drops down, and you unload that thing quickly, and you get deployed quickly, and you start moving forward on the enemy. So when you're hitting this, you're hitting it hard. Your boots are pounding. And I say this from experience. So both in training and for real. So going a little heavier here. And plus this on the inside will be pointed up. So, no problem having a lot of chipping there. I'm not going to bother chipping up here. I mean, there might be a little bit of chipping, but I'm just not going to bother. And I've only done a little bit there. Got some here, got some there, got the floor. So we'll call the chipping good to go. All right, the final step I'm going to take is to use some of this Vallejo model wash. Now, I could thin down a Citadel wash or a Citadel contrast paint or even a Citadel paint to do this. I'm using this because I don't have to do any extra steps. I use it right out of the bottle. I like this because it dries fairly translucent, and I like the color of this European dust. In fact, this one I like so much because I've got quite a few bottles of these, and whenever I look in the drawer that I have them in, I'm looking at the top. I label this one because this is what I go for. Easily 9 out of 10 times. So all I'm going to do is just get a little on my brush and just use a little piece of paper towel. This is actually a piece of paper tissue, and just wick off a little. And all I'm going to do is just go for some light stains. Now, this is something, again, if I'm doing some heavier staining, I would probably put a lot more on, but because I'm going for a slightly lighter look, a slightly less beat up look, both for time and purposes. My purpose is not to have a heavily beat up vehicle on the inside, because the outside is not going to be heavily beat up, since this is kind of a beginner build. But I'm just going to put some on there like that. Let it dry, let it do a little coffee staining. Go over here, put some down along here, like that. Just like, there's going to be mud from your boots that gets up in there. There's going to be mud when they walk out these side exits. It's going to get on there. There's going to be mud that goes on this thing when they exit. So putting some of this in some quantity is going to make it look a little more, that it's fitting the part of what you're building. You can put, just a few up here like that. Mud can get splattered everywhere. Mud gets all over your uniform. Mud gets everywhere. Some on the seat, certainly. Because when you're in combat, there's times where you have to just dive to the ground, and you don't look for a place that's clean or free of water or free of mud. You're essentially, and this is not exaggerating, you're looking for a place that's free from bullets. That's what you're looking for. So a little bit of mud, a little bit of water, you don't care. Where are there not bullets? Where is there not fragments? That's what you're looking for. Again, you do this as much or as little on your model as you want. And you notice that patchy way that I put on that very initial contrast paint just kind of contributes to this. This kind of sells the patchiness of the contrast paint as being just more subtle and maybe perhaps older mud, dirt effects. So it all builds up. Whenever I'm working on a model, I try to think not only what am I doing now, but how does this contribute to the end state? So I like to say, what eventually is going to come out of the end of the sausage maker. Just keep adding this in. And what I'll do off camera is I'll put this together, dry fit this together, and look and see, does this look like I want it to? Do I need to add some more? Do I need to take this original Wraithbone color and sponge over it and reduce some of this stuff? Here on the floor, I'm a very big advocate in depth of finish. And I don't think if you're trying to use acrylics for various mud stains or even oils or enamels, that one layer is enough. You've got to put layer over layer over layer, and it builds up, especially with these acrylics where they leave staining. You want stains over stains, and sometimes it helps to even get a little water on your brush, get a little water into the mix, and then just put some on that's a little runnier, a little more translucent, and put that around in areas. Just go with what seems like it works. All right, everything's mostly dry. I realized I forgot to put any chipping on this strip down here like that, so I just put it over the staining. It still wasn't dry. I just let it kind of mix together. It'll all work. Got this looking, it's fairly beat up. That's honestly a little more beat up than I wanted, but I can live with it, especially since it's not going to be real visible. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. And you can see how that Griff Charger gray looks right there. I mean, it just looks like a dull steel to my eye. So that's what I keep telling myself. And then I've got that painted on there. And at this point, because I'm finishing up, this is Sunday, I'm finishing this up. And I don't remember if when I was showing this the first time, if I mentioned that I'm using Striking Scorpion Green contrast paint and Bale Red for these. Now, I could go in and I could work on this and I could do more and I could make it highlighted more. There's a whole lot more I could do if this was going to be something that was going to be fairly well seen and fairly well showcased. Do some edge highlighting, use some light gray or something like that, and I may go back and do it. But for the most part, if it's going to be fairly out of the way, really what you want to be seen in the shadow of what they will be able to see is the green screens and some red buttons. That's the main thing. Now, when I look inside there, I'll test it. And if I think it needs a little more, I'll put a little more. In fact, because this is contrast paint, I may be able to just wipe some right off the edge like that. And I've got my edge highlighting. Contrast paint doesn't stick real well. You have to put some kind of coating over it generally. Doesn't reactivate, Army Painter, but it's not the best adhering of paints, but we can use that to our advantage. Let me get this assembled and show you on camera what it looks like when you look down into it. All right, here it is dry fitted, and it's a little harder to show on camera what you can actually see in person, but you can see the details. I think that's sufficient for being closed up like it is. Now that I'm looking at that front control area, I may go in and do a little bit more highlighting. I'm thinking just a few bits of gray highlighting on some of the major edges, and maybe a dot of highlight on each of the red elements because they just look a little too flat. I think the green panels work okay, but I think other than that, I'm even pretty happy with the gun, the way the contrast paint worked there. But for the most part, except for that little bit of change, I'll be able to take this, and I've still got to determine which way is forward. I think it's this way, but I'll know in the final build. I'll make sure to determine that, but there it is. It's ready to be painted. I'll glue it all together, and what I'll be showing in the video for YouTube, I'll never mention the fact that I did any work on the inside. In fact, to obscure it, I will probably go back and reprime it in gray, and just never mention the fact that, hey, I did the interior. Hey, I've got it magnetized to put this on there. Hey, I'm going to be painting some crewmen to go on it. You guys will see that, but for the purposes of the YouTube build, I'm going to keep it fairly simple, with the idea being that, you know, this is aimed at a beginner. It's not an absolute end-all be-all beginner video, but it's the kind of thing that if somebody's looking at just, okay, what are the basic steps? I've actually tried to think, if my son were 10, 11, 12 years old, and he said, hey, Dad, I want to build one of these models. And I remembered back to my youth and building models, or maybe I didn't. Maybe I never grew up doing that. Could I watch this video and kind of extrapolate from this? Okay, here's how I help my son, my daughter, build a model so that they enjoy it and we can do it as a project together. So that's my thinking with this. So that's kind of my target audience, really. All right, well, that'll wrap up this portion of the Rhino / Razorback build. You get to see the super secret part of it. The rest of the world gets to see the Rhino part of it. So I know this has been really simple. My hope here is that it's just demonstrated some real simple ways to use not a lot of paints. I mean, a lot of times I use a lot of paints, and this time I used these. Let me pull that guy out. That's just contrast medium. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I probably could have got away with just using water instead of the contrast medium. So whether you use contrast paints or regular paints, and I could have swapped these out for each other. I could have just moved that down to 1. And if I'm using paints, I didn't need this one because I could have used this one thinned way down. And, you know, I probably could have gotten away on this with about 4 or 5 paints if I'd have wanted to, and still had pretty much the same result. I would just had to be a little more clevering with my thinning, a little bit of mixing, things like that. So the point is, you can come up with good-looking parts of a model that are, maybe they're going to be seen, maybe they're not going to be seen, but my focus here was something that's not really going to be seen that much, but make it look decent. And my total time spent on this, if I would not have been filming this, it would have taken me probably an hour and a half. If I really would have made judicious use of my hairdryer, maybe an hour. So it's not something that needs to take a long time if speed is important to you, if you're needing to get it done. If you were painting your vehicles and you really wanted to paint the interiors, even though it wasn't going to be seen that much, this is a method of doing it fairly quickly. So hopefully this has been beneficial in some way. Well, as always, thank you so much for being a patron, especially if you're watching at this point. I'm like I say in just about every video, I'm grateful for all the patrons who support the work that I do, support me and my family in this way. But I'm especially grateful for the few that I see the stats, for the few that hang around till the very end. So thank you all very much for sticking with me and supporting the work that I do. I know I'm not anything to write home about when it comes to model building, and you know, it's not lost on me that you support what I do when there are probably a lot of other people that are way more accomplished in this hobby, know way more than I do. So thank you very much for supporting us in this way. And you know what I always say, and I always mean it. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Evaluate everything you do based on that criteria. Are you having fun? Sometimes stuff isn't fun, and sometimes you have to go, no, this isn't fun, and I know it's not going to be fun, so let me get through this, but I know that the next part will be fun. Or it should be fun right now, it's not, let me step away from it. and maybe focus on some other things and come back to it when I think it can be fun. But I always focus on the fun, so I'll leave you with that. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.